Nowadays, it might not be unusual to see the Crosman name on something made in China. And traditionally, we all know that they were all made in America, United States of America. Unless, of course, they were made in Canada. Welcome back to Canuck Air. Well, this is something I couldn't resist passing up. You no doubt saw my earlier video on the Umarex single-action Peacemaker gun, and Crosman made a Peacemaker of their own way back when. This is a Crosman SA6, or single-action number 6. They made it from 1959 to 1969. And so those are interesting things, but this one, as you can see marked right here, is Crosman Arms Canada Limited, Dunnville, Ontario. Dunnville is a small town north of Lake Erie and getting close to Niagara Falls, in case you're wondering. So there was, in fact, a Crosman plant there back in the day, and they made a variety of Crosman guns, and including this one, apparently. Although I have seen some lists of guns made there, and this one's not included on it, but well, they can update it because this is definitely a Dunnville-made gun. Unlike the more modern versions of the Peacemaker-type guns we see, this is a version that has the CO2 gas cylinder stored underneath the barrel, and you tighten this little knurled nut here, which is pretty well worn on this one. This gun's had, obviously, a lot of fun over its years. And the cylinder goes in there. Crosman gave a little cover to sort of disguise it a wee bit. This one is a spring steel one, blued, I guess, originally. I understand some of them were a black plastic, which frequently either gets lost or broken. So this one has survived. Clearly, this gun was not originally in the raw zinc casting, or Zamac alloy, zinc alloy, whatever you want to call it. Somebody has taken all the black finish off it. They've also replaced the grips. Maybe they broke. Maybe they just didn't like the look of them. The grips were originally a plastic staghorn type of design in them. These are made of, looks like, fairly thin, maybe mahogany or something. Not terribly done, but I think if I can get this gun looking a little better, I will make some new grips for it. Don't have any staghorn laying around, so we'll have to see what best we can do. Very cool thing about this gun is the fact the whole cylinder rotates, which we see on the newer Umarex-based designs. But this was kind of neat because in later years, Crosman, when they brought out things like the 38T and the later 357, only the front sliver of the cylinder rotated. The rest of it was where the valve was housed. So this has a bit more authentic look and feel to it, and I've read some positive comments about these guns over the years, and well, I sort of understand it a little bit now. It does have a nice balance and feel to it, and that is certainly has a certain amount of realism to it, even if the bulgy CO2 cylinder does ride up front like that. So we're going to have some fun with this thing, tear it all down, see how it works. I find it rather clever because obviously the cylinder gas goes right in the front here, and the hammer releases it. There, the valve releases right there. So the cylinder literally revolves around the valve, which is kind of clever. Yeah, not bad. Obviously, it seems a little more logical these days to conceal the CO2 cylinder right in here, but in those days, when they made a lot of guns, the single-shot versions, for instance, the cylinder sat out front and the valve in the back, and they simply found a way to make that into a revolving gun. So, pretty clever. We'll tear it all down, see if we can clean up some of the rough spots on it. As I say, this gun has obviously had a lot of pellets through it over the years and a lot of shooting. We'll find out how it all works and what we can improve on it and go from there. Interestingly, this gun uses a traditional leaf spring, just like a correct 1873 Peacemaker would. That probably helps contribute to the smoothness of its trigger pull. I had a lot of trouble getting this cylinder and valve assembly apart. I thought there was some sort of trick to it, but in the end I kind of realized that it was just the valve was just rather stuck in there. If I pulled on it a little harder, it probably would have just pulled right out. But I was going to be taking the valve apart anyway, so it really didn't matter. The filter here is to stop little bits of metal from getting into the valve assembly. Because the gun pierces the metal tip of the cartridge every time, there's always a chance a fleck of metal could come off and get blown into the valve assembly where it would do damage to the seals. This interesting spring here is actually what holds the pellets in the little recesses in the cylinder. You push the pellets in from the front, and that little spring just kind of clips over the skirt of the pellet, at least it's supposed to. I sprayed the metal parts down with paint stripper, and then wrapped them up to let them soften up. So it did the job. The original paint was pretty tough on there, but it eventually came off. It seemed appropriate to use a file to take some of the rougher edges off the joins in the casting. Not really going to turn a sow's ear into a silk purse, but yeah, this is some of the stuff the factory just never got time to do. I ended up using the remaining piece of honey locust that I first cut into when I was making the grips for the Crosman Mark I some months ago. Wood was pretty easy to work with and has an interesting grain. As I said, the original grips for the gun were hollow plastic simulated staghorn, so I wasn't me going down that road, but I had hopes that these would look half decent when I was done. It's always useful to keep a nice hand drill around in the workshop. We're so used to using power tools, but when you want to just make a nice little short hole in wood, nothing beats the light touch of a hand drill. I ended up using 2 stains for the grips. Start off here with a lighter color. I think this is the gun, what they call gun stock. Slightly orangey tone to it. A second coating of a darker brown sort of really brought out the grain in the wood. The knurling on the cartridge retaining or screw was just really worn down. It was very hard to get a decent grip on it with your fingers. So I went through every last groove and deepened it with a file. It certainly did the job. The hole in the side of the valve is where the air escapes from when the valve stem is hit by the hammer. So the blast of CO2 gets jetted upwards out of that hole right there. And it gets jetted into one of these little 6 holes that are hidden inside this rim of the cylinder. So there it goes upwards, turns the corner, and then comes out its appropriate pellet hole. You can see one of the problems with this design is that spring that goes around that retains the pellets is, of course, transparent to gas. So some of the gas will leak out through the spring. Don't really see any way to prevent that. Use silicone oil and silicone grease where appropriate. In the moving parts, I use my favorite moly grease. I put some oil on this filter sponge, but later on I ended up taking it out or cleaning it a little bit more. I was worried not enough gas was getting through, but I don't think that really made a difference.
little spring and ball bearing is a rather difficult thing to install. I'm sure it's much easier to do it at the factory.
Well, I've got the Crosman SA6 all back together again. Took a bit of fiddling with the little ball bearing detent on the back of the cylinder. That seems to be difficult part to get back in again. But it's all back in together, and I put a cylinder in it and tested it, and it does in fact shoot. So, and it's not leaking, so that's a win. The finish doesn't look too bad in black. I was worried it was a little bit too shiny. I actually rubbed some wax into it and maybe just take a little bit of the gloss of fresh spray can paint off of there. But and the grips look good. Need to be tightening down a little bit more, but they look all right. And so what have I learned about this interesting relic from the boys and girls who made it at Dunnville, Ontario, all back in those days? And by the way, I checked on the Blue Book of Air Guns for information on Crosman's various factories, and there is absolutely no mention of anything made in Dunnville. So something they can probably add to a later edition, I think. The sharpening up the knurling on the cylinder, what do you call it, screw there, that definitely helps a lot getting it on there. And I discovered too, this gun is a little interesting in that this is one of those early CO2 guns where you put the cylinder in, tighten it down, and then nothing happens until you cock it and fire it, because that valve pin that goes through has the sharp pointy end on the end and actually pierces the cylinder. So you have to cock it and fire it first before you can shoot it. So yeah, one of those. Another interesting struggle with the darn thing is what pellets to put through it. You'd think it'd be fairly easy, but it isn't. The cylinder depth is not all that deep, the little chamber there where you put the pellet in from the front. And as much as you might think Crosman Super Pellets would go in there just fine, and they probably should go in there, these ones aren't. They are getting old. I just can't get them to click onto that little retaining spring that runs around the inside of the cylinder there that retains the pellets in place. Just won't click in there. Other pellets like these Grizzly domed pellets, inexpensive ones, Chinese made, are just too long. When you put them in, the dome sticks out the front there a little bit and rubs against that the retaining plate in there that holds them in place. And yeah, it doesn't work. The RWS Super Domes, I was able to shoot those through it all right. These are just that tad little bit shorter. That dome does rub on the back of the plate though. And when you've got 6 in there, there's a fair bit of friction. And every time you cock it, the friction gets a little, and fire it, the friction gets a little bit less because, of course, you're getting rid of the pellets. So the last couple of shots aren't so bad. But it is definitely a bit of a struggle. Any pointed pellets, long ones like that, not a chance. They're not going in there. Well, I did find it fit just beautifully. Worked nicely with the RWS Meisterkugelns. They're just exactly the right length for the cylinder. They do click in past the spring and lock in place. So the gun's got sort of a slightly expensive taste. There's got to be something else. And I went digging in my box, and sure enough, Crosman Premiers, these hollow point ones, which have a little bit of a flatter surface on the front, these actually do go in just fine. So that would be probably the technically correct pellet for this old gun. So yeah, that's good. I might have to find some more of those for that. Other domed pellets or whatever, yeah, just not working. So interesting. One that dropped in just fine if you had this gun back in the day. Here's a vintage tin of Webley pellets. These just go in no problem at all because again they're quite short. But these are unless you had a time machine, you're not getting any more of those. Even the H&N Excite hammer pellets didn't go in very well either. They bound up a bit against the front. So yeah, you need a short pellet, and flatter front is always a good idea. Interesting feature on this gun that I didn't properly appreciate before I took it apart is it has a half cock feature. When you fire it, hammer comes all the way forward and trips the valve. And then if you want to carry it in a safe mode, you just pull it back a little bit there. Trigger can't pull, and you can't knock the hammer against the valve. So that's the safe position for it, and also the position you would use when you're stuffing pellets in the front. One drawback to this type of design is you are stuffing pellets in from the front. And once in, there's no way of getting them out except to fire them outward. So, yeah, that's something, I think in later years they looked at. The ability to unload a gun is just as important, perhaps, as to load a gun. To always have to shoot it off is a bit of an issue, but that is what you would have to do with this one. There's really no other way to get the pellets out. The Crosman 38Ts, you loaded them in from the back of the cylinder. There was a way to poke them backwards. You could get the gun unloaded if you had to, although, again, probably safer to just point it in a safe direction and blast away. But, yeah, this is just so much a drawback of that type of design. I do think it's rather ingenious, though, what they were doing by putting the CO2 cylinder up front with a central valve, and as I think I showed you on the disassembly, those little rectangular ports that you've got the zinc alloy front part of the cylinder and the steel plate at the back, and those little ports are obviously covered off when they attach the steel part, but those ports, the valve blasts upwards and down the barrel, and yeah, it works actually kind of fine. Impressions of it? I initially, every time I saw pictures of this gun back in the day, I always kind of hung up on how the CO2 cylinder looks stuck beneath the barrel like this. It looks a bit ungainly. This has a spring steel sleeve over it to kind of hide it, but it doesn't. That isn't necessary. It's just cosmetic. But yeah, I always thought that maybe made the gun look a bit unbalanced. But when it's in your hand, you don't see that at all. And when you're shooting it, you don't have any impression of it at all. I mean, again, it's just cosmetics making it look more like a authentic 1873 style Peacemaker. But it actually is quite a decent gun. That the hammer and cocking mechanism is quite good. The trigger pull is excellent. So yeah, I can see why people really do enjoy this gun. It lacks the efforts at authenticity that I see on the Umarex Peacemaker that I have with the loading gate and the drop-in cartridges and the ejector rod. Yeah, very, very much trying to follow the mechanism of an 1873 gun. This only is kind of basically following its cosmetics on the outside. Although the hammer spring that does go down the grip is very much a authentic touch. I don't understand why the one chamber flute is cut deeper and you can cut right through to where the spring shows up there. I'm not sure why that is there. Manufacturing purpose. Don't know. All the rest of them look perfectly normal, and that one is cut deeper. And that is how they did it, and I'm not sure exactly why. There must be a very good reason for doing so. Anyway, the next step will be to gas it back up again with a fresh cartridge and shoot it across the chronograph and see what we get out of it. I don't have super high hopes for the gun. It seems to get a lot of shots out of one cartridge, first one I put in there, so that was a bit of a surprise, which means it's not using up a lot of gas. So it went for quantity, not power. And as for accuracy, I don't have high hopes of that either. Just shooting at my backstop in my workshop here, I could definitely see the pellets were not entirely going where I expected them to. They seem to have a bit of a right-left spin as they come out, but that could be, velocity related, that kind of thing. So we'll have to see if there's a pellet that it likes better. I have to test a few. Not that there's many that fit in there. So anyway, onwards and upwards.
Well, I decided to use the Crosman premieres for our chronograph testing, and I got, to be kind, rather erratic results. Some ridiculously high readings, which obviously were wrong, and then, of course, a bunch of readings in the 130s. I did run this test again later, and after just tightening a few things up on the gun, and I saw a few shots into the 150 feet per second range, which is still disappointingly slow for a CO2-powered revolver, even if it isn't 22. But, yeah, it is what it is. I'm just going to say that it probably just comes down to wear and tear and loose fitting parts here and there. So I decided instead of shooting it at a paper target, I would take it out and in search of its natural quarry, the dreaded aluminum can. I shot at these 6 cans several times, and this was the only time I was able to hit all 6 in a row. So you can barely see the yellowy gold one at the back. That was my hardest target. I hit it. There you go. So I have to say I've enjoyed my time with this Crosman SA6. I will probably at some point when I get the time pull it apart again and see if I can improve on its velocity figures, because that's clearly where it's falling down a bit. And again, it may not have been that powerful a gun to start with. The fact that it gets so many shots on a single cartridge suggests that it's there's something going on there. Maybe you try a lighter hammer spring inside, not the hammer spring, the valve spring, so that the valve stays open a little bit longer. That might let more gas through. And I will try a few tweaks here and there, so long as I can put them back if they don't work out. But this is Crosman's 100th anniversary this year, and I thought this was kind of a fun way to wrap up some of the Crosmans that I've done this year. There's been quite a few. And this one is made in Canada at the Dunnville, Ontario factory that is no longer there. But I'm sure there's many people who did work there once upon a time and may still remember making guns like these. I'm kind of glad they did. It is a rather pretty thing. But anyway, thanks for watching. Kamakura will be returning with a lot more fun and interesting things. Consider subscribing.